friends, and welcome to Coffee with Cathy. This is the last of our series for the summer, and we'll be taking a break and coming back in the fall. But today, I'm going to actually be interviewed by Derrick, our minister of music here at Park Avenue Church. And I'll be drinking from this beautiful cup, which a friend gave to me some time ago. And on the inside, it says, "Friends, fill your life with joy." And I couldn't say it better. And so I'm grateful today for dear friends. And Derrick is one of my friends most of the time. So thank you, Derrick, for doing this today and for all of your friendship and partnership all the time.
Oh no, and thank you. This will be fun, and it'll be interesting. It'll be a fun little interview. The cup I have today is it's my London cup. I think it's from Starbucks, but it's a London cup. Has a little outline of the London skyline with black, and so it's one of my favorite cups that we have. But with that said, shall we get started and
Yes.
talk about it?
Get started.
All right. First, I want to ask you, how are you doing? How are you feeling right now?
Well, in this moment, I'm feeling the best I've felt in 2020. My oldest son and his wife and family and my grandkids came up on Thursday for the weekend, and it was just wonderful to see them. And they just texted me that they're back home. It's Monday afternoon at 5 o'clock, even though we're drinking coffee. But it was really wonderful to see them and to be together. We had not seen each other since Christmas. Mm-hmm. And for us, this was the longest span that I've not seen my children since I moved to New York 17 years ago. And my son was like, "I need to see my family. We're coming." And I was like, "Come on." So in this moment, I'm feeling really good after a lot of really hard weeks, right? A lot of really hard weeks since March 8th, dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, and then the other pandemics that have faced our country and our world. So I'm grateful for some love, and grateful to see them and encourage them as they've encouraged me. So.
Yes, it's family can be wonderful. I remember you were very excited because you got to bake a cake, and you're all excited.
Two cakes.
Wow. So you've been busy.
2 homemade cakes.
I'm sure they were wonderful.
Yeah.
I want to go back and talk a little bit about your life and what you've experienced throughout your life. We were talking a little bit before this started about when you started school. Schools were segregated, and then I believe it was at around 13 is when you went to your first integrated school. And what was that experience like, and what do you remember about that?
Well, first of all, I was raised in a small town in North Carolina, and I was surrounded by, of course, my parents and 5 siblings, but also my grandmother and aunts and uncles and cousins. And so really, it was really this sort of village, right, where people really looked out for each other. And from first grade, we didn't even go to kindergarten, to 7th grade, it was a segregated school. And looking back at those teachers and the principals and all of the staff at school, it was a sense that everybody was invested in the children, right? It was really a community thing. My great aunt was one of the teachers, my 3rd grade teacher. And, we had Glee Club, and we had all kinds of extracurricular activities. 4-H Club is when I learned to public speak. And so it was this really kind of warm and nurturing experience. And that's what I was born into. And then at 8th grade, we integrated. And so it was a whole other experience, because even though there were white people that lived in our community, I wasn't as conscious of racism as a child in those early years, because they were just neighbors, right? And neighbors, if there was a tragedy or somebody died or whatever, people stopped by, or we stopped by, they brought something. And so that's all I knew. And then when we went to 8th grade, then there was this whole other experience of adjustments. And so there were adjustments from the Black children, but there was also adjustment from the white children and teachers as well. And so there was that sense of not having that same kind of support system of the unknown, and why did certain things happen, and why did some children all of a sudden start getting in trouble, right? Because these were kids that I'd known, or why they were put in a certain group, right? There were the smart kids. Of course, I was in the smart kid group. But there was also this sort of, children that had some kind of challenge were sort of put in another group, another category. And I first became very conscious of that around 8th grade.
Yeah, it must have been interesting going from this feeling of being around family, especially being, because you said, like you said, your great aunt was one of the teachers, and it's, even though none of the schools I went to were segregated, I know a lot of people in my family were teachers, and so there's definitely this warming feeling that comes being taught by your family members, and taught from those that have your best interests at heart. And I feel like, generally speaking, especially when you're in a group of Black people, that's for me too, where I've felt most like, okay, this group of people has my best interests as hard as Black people, because we kind of learn to band together and learn to stick together. And I learned a lot of that from my parents. What have you learned from your parents and the struggles they went through, and the faith that they had?
Well, oh my God, it's just, and I talked a little bit about this in my sermon last Sunday, but it was, there was this expectation, right? That we were going to go to college, that we were going to succeed, that we were going to make something of our lives. And, it's still fascinating to me how my parents thought that that could be possible, because they didn't have it. They didn't have the money to send us, right? But it was also the teachers at that school, like, the people in the community, the people that you went to Sunday school and church with. I was the first person in my family to go away to college, even though I had 3 older siblings. But because my parents emphasized education so much, right? That was the way to freedom. Bell Hooks talks about that in one of her books, that education is the key. So from, I don't know, I guess from 1st grade, I knew I was going to college. I didn't know what I was going to major in. They didn't care, doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, but you were going to college. That's true.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's why my older siblings went back years later, because that was so drummed into us. You're going to go to college. You got to get your education. And so it was this whole kind of communal expectation that these girls were going to, go out into the world and make something of their lives. And so I'm just grateful for that. And I think it's so important for parents, as children are growing, to have great hopes for their children. And my parents, as I said, they really didn't care what we did, but they wanted us to be the best that we could be. And, so I'm always grateful for that. I'm always grateful for, they taught us how to work hard. There was no expectation that we were going to get in this world if we didn't work. So that's what I do, and, I graduated college in 3 years. Wow. And, because I had to get on with it, right? And then when I went back and I to get my Master's of Divinity from Duke, I was working full time at the business school, because by then I was a divorced parent of 2. But that's what you did. You worked for what you wanted in life, and you trusted, and you had faith, and you believed that somehow by God's good grace, despite racism, despite sexism, despite all the obstacles that were in your way, you could make it. So I just grew up thinking somehow I could do whatever. you know, and I owe my parents for that, because, you know, they just believed in their children. And as I said in the sermon last week, we were their why. We were the reason they pushed and they worked and they toiled and they never gave up. And the fact that they stayed married for 61 years, oh my goodness. Can you imagine 61 years with the same person? But they did, and so they model for us that level of deep commitment and what was important in life. So.
Well, and you know, I think it's evident that that has paid off. You know, you're now on the Upper East Side in New York City, past leading a church on the Upper East Side, and you're the, I love saying this, the Reverend Dr. Cathy Escallion. I mean, it's true that hard work pays off.
You know, I'll be honest. When I really didn't care about being the Reverend Doctor. But I knew for some people in some circles, it would matter. Mm-hmm. For Cathys, you know, hey, give me a break. Most of the time, I don't even use it, right? But it is important. And I did work hard. But yeah, it was just always my parents, that message ringing in my ear. You're going to need more. You're going to need more. And so go for it. Regardless of how difficult it is, go for it. Because nobody can say you're not qualified for the job. They can say, we don't want you because you're a woman. Or we don't want you because you're a person of color. But they cannot tell you honestly that you haven't paid your dues and you're not qualified. And so that was the next step. So I did.
Yes, and you've built a wonderful career. Another thing that you mentioned earlier, you are a mother. What has being a Black mother in America taught you, and what does being a Black mother in America mean to you?
Well, it means everything to me, as I've said, and it is the highest achievement in my life. I'm a divorced mother, but my children are my life, my family. And again, I'm sure I learned that from my parents and watching them. I'm a mother of 2 sons. And so that was, you know, that was hard. And that's been a source of great anxiety. And I think statistically, when I think about it, we've already beaten the odds, because as children of divorced parents, the likelihood that they would be alive and well and have families of their own, both of them, and having a decent life, a good life, you know, the odds were against them. Mm-hmm. But here they are, and here we are. And we're extremely close. And I'm not ashamed to say they're mama's boys. Okay. I love their wives. I love them to death. And because I love my sons, I love their wives. And I'm happy to do that. But yeah, it's been hard. It's been hard, and a lot of worry. And even to this day, and I think until I'm in my grave, I'll always carry a certain amount of anxiety about them and where they are and what's happening to them. They've certainly shared many stories with me about their experiences as Black men. And some I'm sure they don't tell me, and I'm okay with that too.
It's a hard time to be a Black man in America when you see everything that's happening in the world. And you know, people have been out in the streets chanting, you know, no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. And you said a beautiful thing yesterday. I think this is after the service, about, you know, maybe you can remember exactly what it was, but you were talking about how the Prince of Peace comes, and that's related to justice. And what have you seen in these protests? Because they've been going down Madison Avenue and down all these streets and going outside. what have you seen in these protests that might not have been there the last time this happened, or the last couple times this happened? Because I personally feel like this feels different, or slightly different, or, you know, but I haven't been through all of this, and, you know, or does it feel different?
It feels different, and it feels wonderful because, one, there's so many young people, right? They're teenagers and 20-somethings. And they're also parents with children. There was a group that marched on 87th and Madison on Saturday, and I was really amazed by, one, how diverse it was, which was wonderful, but also the number of children and young families and men. And so I'm grateful for this movement that involves so many people, right? So many people, people of all colors and races and, you know, ages. And because I think it's just time now for something else. And it cannot be the Black people's movement, although I don't think it ever was. I think it's about people's conscience. What do you morally believe about systemic racism, about oppression, about police brutality, knowing that there are many wonderful policemen, but there are also police that are brutal and harmful and kill people and hurt people, and the justice system hasn't been just. And, you know, I think it's an opportunity for anybody who thinks that that's wrong to express themselves, whether it's a march, and I think many people are doing many different things, but I'm grateful. I'm also grateful that for the first time in my life, there are these conversations about race. It's almost always the elephant in the room for Black people and brown people, I think. It certainly is for me, almost always. I'm always aware. If I walk into a restaurant, if I walk into a board meeting, in an instant, I am aware of my presence in that room. And depending on who else is in that room, I start adjusting myself accordingly. And I don't assume that those people are going to be friends or friendly to me. If anything, I assume that I'm going to have to gird myself. Does that make sense? That I'm going to have to prepare myself somehow. And so now this elephant that's always present has a stage that we can talk about it. And I think that's wonderful and that's powerful, and I'm grateful for it. It's time.
It's time. It is a time. Do you think there will ever be, you know, justice and peace? Do you think we'll ever reach that day?
Well, when I think about justice, and I've been thinking about it, because, you know, we think about, well, how do we go back and right the wrong? I'm not sure that that will happen. It scares me, because I think what our country and our world needs from a theological perspective is probably more grace and forgiveness and mercy, right? Because I don't know what justice looks like in the past. What gives me hope is that it might happen. It is possible now. And it is possible for the future. And that's my concern, right? I want a world that's more just, that's more fair. I believe it is possible because the Prince of Peace says it is, right? At the end of the day, I'm a preacher of the gospel, and I believe that God's kingdom can come. You know, it's, you know, gosh, it's been almost 17 years now that I've been in New York. And you know the story of how I was invited by Steve Bauman at Christ Church to come and join the staff. And, you know, what kept ringing in my ear was that, quote, that Martin Luther King said about, and I'm not quoting it exactly, but about 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in the week. And, you know, I wasn't looking, but here was this opportunity at my feet. And so it made me think about it differently. What do I fundamentally believe about God and the body, right? And how is it that we can all sing Amazing Grace, right? Or I Surrender All, or whatever. How can we say the same Lord's Prayer and we can't be together? We can't say it together as community. So I think it's possible, but it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be cheap. But I'm going to do everything I can, as long as there's breath in my body and I'm in my right mind, to work toward that end.
Yes, and you are already doing a lot to help with that. And I think about that King quote, and then I look at, you know, our community at PAUMC, and it's the, you know, I've been working in churches since I was 7 years old, and I've been in the church since I was, you know, barely breathing, and so it is the most diverse community that I have ever been a part of, and I call them my PAUMC family for a reason, and because it really does feel like a family, and it feels like a community, and I truly believe that comes down, you know, from the top, and that stems down from you. But before you got to the church, what did you learn along your way about the church working in multiracial settings?
Well, I learned that it was possible. You know, I grew up in the Black church, and that's where I learned about liberation theology. That's where I learned the God of all people. And so regardless of what the world was saying about me or people who look like me, there was a God, right, who loved me and who loved us. And so those foundational years were incredible. It was where, you know, we learned those, you know, I watch our kids now in those Christmas pageants, and I think, yeah, you know, those seeds that are planted in them, they're going to pick up and bear fruit. You know, the kids may not even know what they're saying, but it's okay. You're saying it anyway, right? And those songs that they sing. And so my understanding of one church, one body, has been affirmed as I've continued to work in multicultural church, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work at our church. I'm grateful for the growth. I mean, just look at our staff, not only ethnically and racially diverse, but age diversity. You know, we're all over the place, and so I think we're just too segregated in our culture. This them or us, right? You know, it's just too much of it. And what would it look like to just learn from each other, right? We have things to offer each other, all of us. And if we do that, we can all be better.
Yes, I agree. And I look at, you know, these companies that, you know, they have a few diversity hires, the few people they hire for their diversity. But then I look at our church and I compare them, and a lot of the times you find these problems in these companies. You find things that you're like, oh, that if there had been a person of color that had a voice, that wouldn't have happened. If you had something like this, if, you know, there's so many instances like that. And I look at our church and how warm it is in the product we create. And it really is, I feel like, born out of diversity. It's born, and not just diversity of race, like you said earlier, but also diversity of age. I think that is very important. And because if you look at our staff, you know, it's the most diverse staff that I have ever been a part of as well. And
we get along.
I know. Who would have thought? and we all have things to talk about and things to learn from each other. And you know, it's really taught me that it's really taught me how I want to run a business when I run things. And it's really shown me, you know, I was thinking the other day, most of my favorite times in the church have been led by Black women pastors. And I think that says a lot, because, you know, being, number one, being a woman, you know, is difficult itself, and being a mother and going through that is difficult. But then also being a Black woman on top of that, you know, it's like a diamond. It puts all this pressure on you, and it forces you to become, it forces you to have this depth and learn and view the world completely differently. And I think that is what America needs. It needs Black people and Black women and women in general running this country. You know, maybe the fact that a woman would take emotions into consideration when looking to blow up a country, maybe that's something we should do. Maybe that's something that is a value. And as you know, the community you've built at PAUMC, I really feel like we can wear our color as a badge of honor versus a demerit. And we can wear our diversity and we can wear our differences as badges of honor. But how would you define diversity? What would you say is diversity?
Well, thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate it. You know, I've been that girl on the diversity brochure, right? I've been that one that was there for the photo op, so people can say, oh, look at us, we're diverse, right? And I do think that diversity is much more than having different people in the room or in the meeting, right? Diversity, authentic diversity, in my opinion, is when we have people in leadership, right? It's when there are Black and brown people, there are women in leadership, chairing committees, not just in the room without a voice. It's when people have space in that room and they're taken seriously, right? And I think there was this push some years ago to hire, you know, people of color, or a person or two, right? Or a female or whatever. But we've got to do better than that, right? We cannot pat ourselves on the back because there are people of another color or gender or even sexual orientation in the room. If those people have no voice, right? If they're still, you know, making the coffee or, you know, silent, seen but not heard, that's not diversity. But diversity is when we are listening and sharing and people feel safe and whole and welcome. And we all bring gifts. We bring different gifts, right? We bring different experiences. But when we put them all together, we have something. And it's what I consistently preach about, right? It's what I say all the time, because I believe it's true. I believe it's true. I just read an article the other week, I think it was in Good Housekeeping or something. It was talking about, you know, people having friends their age, but also people having friends who are older, people having friends who are younger, right? There's no bad stage of life. And how do we gracefully go into the next stage? And how do we honor and appreciate the wisdom of those who've gone before? And how do those of us who've gone before lighten up a little bit and say, thank God for these young people. And I now have a responsibility to help shape and nurture them for what's coming next, right? So I think we might need to find another catchword besides diversity if it's not authentic. And that's what I want to push for. What is true? And not just having people to have people, right? Not just having, you know, a Black person or that token person, right? But how do we make it true and real for them and for the organization?
Yes, I agree. And you know, I have often been that token person. You have as well. What has being in that situation taught you about how you want to run organizations, and what has it taught you in terms of, you know, what not to do, almost in some ways, really?
Well, I think it's taught me to try to do exactly what I'm doing. It's taught me to be sitting here with Coffee with Cathy because it was Derrick Byers' idea. And here I am. No, seriously. Like, I want to value the people that are around me. I want to value their input and their ideas, and I want them to be free to make them. And, you know, we spend a lot of time in our staff meeting brainstorming, and there are no bad ideas. We end up laughing about things that don't really work, but everybody's free to put them out there. And I hope that's true for our congregation as well, right? You know, everybody has an idea and opinion. We often may not have the capacity to do everything that someone wants, but, you know, let's put it out there. It's made me want to be more open to what people have to say and not shut everything down just because, or that some people have the better idea, or it should be their way at the expense of other people who never get to even say anything, let alone have their idea valued. Yeah.
What would you say is your hope for our PAUMC community, and even the conference, the United Methodist Church Conference, moving forward?
Well, I love our church. I really do. And it's been a great gift to me to be able to serve this congregation and to express my leadership and my passion in this community. I'll start my 10th year on July 1st. And gosh, I've watched us grow in numbers, but also in things that we as a community think we should do. I've seen miracles happen, you know, just when I thought we weren't gonna make it, we made it. I think we can do anything that we set our hearts and minds to do. And as you said, Derrick, you know, I feel like our church is far more diverse than most churches, even in New York. And so just the embodiment of who we are, right? Just, we look like the body of Christ, right? And I think we can and we will continue to be who we are, be who God would have us to be. I think that is welcoming for people who visit us. Mm-hmm. I think we're, you know, oftentimes people are surprised. You know, they have this perception of what they think Upper East Side Church is going to be like. And then they come and they see me, and then they see you and they hear you, right? And they look around and they're, you know, there's Joseph and Brandon sitting together, right? And they're laughing and they're in love, or they're, you know, there's all of this. They're young families. So it's this community that I think is special because everyone is welcome. Because, you know, we're not homogenous, mm-hmm. right? We don't all look the same. We don't all have to think the same way. We don't all have to vote the same way, right? But somehow, by God's good grace, we do church and we do God, right? And it's not just spoken in my mind, but it's also, you know, embodied. And I think that's what people are looking for. As it relates to the conference, I think, you know, there's a lot of things that have to happen. Our bishop has asked me to serve on a racism task force, which I'm happy to do and have some voice there. But, you know, there's gotta be some acknowledgement of the truth. Racism abounds in our conference as it does in our world, right? And, you know, I long for the time where the church, capital C, the body of Christ, will be setting the tone for culture, mm-hmm. instead of the culture setting the tone for the church and everything else. It may not happen in my lifetime, but there's work to do. I think our bishop has a heart for wanting to do the work. And it's going to be slow. It's going to be slow. But I think every step towards loving God and loving one another and healing and reconciliation, these are not just catchphrases in the church, right? We have to start and we have to be intentional. And it's going to be exhausting, but we cannot quit. And I think in a way, you know, gosh, it's like COVID-19 happened. We're not worshiping in our sanctuaries. You know, we're already displaced. Mm-hmm. And now this reality, this focus on systemic racism, it's a great hour for the church. And I think if we're not authentic, if we don't rise to this occasion, where will we be in another 20 years? Because if the young people are the ones who are marching, they're going to be the ones who are voting. Mm-hmm. They're going to be the ones who are saying enough is enough. If the church, body of Christ, is not relatable, if we're inconsistent with what they think is important, they're not going to buy it. There will, you know, I'm not talking just about our church, but I'm talking about the church. Yes. They're not going to be hypocrites. They're not going to march the streets and protest and do all of those things and fight for policy changes and vote and fight for representation and then come to the church that's inconsistent with what they believe. So there's work to do. There's work to do.
Yes, I agree. There's a lot of work to do. And I think everybody on all sides has work to do. Is the work equal? No. But I think, you know, everybody has a lot of work to do. And I think we can begin that work by stopping this like chain and circle of hate that's been going on and replacing the hate with love. It's harder to do that. It's much harder to love somebody. It's much harder to listen with love. You know, it's much harder to go, you know, maybe I should just put my dog on a leash and just walk away. That's harder to do. And I acknowledge that. But I think if we start doing that, you know, people ask, what would Jesus do? That's what Jesus would do. He would choose love, always, at least in my opinion.
I think we also have to be more conscious. You know, most people would say they don't hate. Mm-hmm. Most people, as a matter of fact, I think most Christians would say they love everybody, right? And yet there's this huge disconnect. And I think the next step is saying, what does that look like? What does it look like when people are mistreated? What does it look like? And what is my involvement? What should I do? And recognize that question of what and why should always be at the forefront, right? And what does that look like? You see, when we hear about these tragedies, we feel bad. But I think, you know, and I've said this, what's been crystallized for me is that there's this big gap between how Black and brown people experience life and how white people, I'm generalizing now, of course, experience life in this country. And I think part of it is just thinking about it, and seeing it for what it is. Mm-hmm. And then seeing, what can I do? What can I do? What should I do? How should I fight for policy? You know, we don't like to look at harmful things on TV, right? It's too gory. We have enough problems. But that's somebody's child, right? That's somebody's husband or father or daughter, right? You know, Jesus focused on the marginalized. He taught us about helping those who were most disadvantaged. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, as educated people, right, I'm very clear that I have some advantages, even in this brown skin. But part of the gospel, well, the essence of the gospel is to love those who others would deem unlovable. And then we must ask, what does that look like in 2020 and 2021? That's the question for the church. Who are they? Right? And there's so many ways. There's not just one way. And we can do it collectively as a body, but we also must do it every day. Every day. We must be thinking about it.
What would you say to, now theoretically, what would you say to young Cathy, or all of the young Cathys that are out there fighting and going through life and are going to have to face some of the same problems you did, but are now fighting today? What would you say to young Cathy?
Oh, gosh. Well, I would say that you are worth fighting for. You are worthy of the fight. You have a place in this world. You have a right to justice. Your very being in this world gives you something. You are gifted just by the fact that you have breath, right? You're God's creation. You're God's child, and you are loved. And you need to honor your place. You need to be a good steward of your life. And you need to work so that others will also have the opportunity to be good stewards of their life. And again, you know, like my parents, it's not about being a this or a that, right? I can tell you, my parents did not care what the title was, right? And I don't much care about the titles, you know. I was delighted to finally figure out what I was supposed to be doing in my life, because for a long time, I tried to not be a minister, because back those days, it wasn't fashionable. Mm-hmm. But once I really knew what I was put on this earth to do, I was happy, because it didn't matter what I had to go through. I was going to do it. And I would say to young Cathy or young anybody, you know, let your life speak. Let it speak to you. Let it tell you your purpose. And then when you discover it, you live into it. Come hell or high water. You be you. Because, you know, there's a scripture that says your gifts will make room for you. I believe that's true. You are entitled to it. You deserve it. And don't you let anybody take that from you.
And now is the time. Now is the time. It really feels like, you know, I always picture this chart in my head, and you kind of spoke to this earlier, of white people have consistently been able to grow and push forward. Yeah, they've had their struggles, but they've been able to pretty consistently push forward without much force against them. Whereas, yes, Black people were freed at the Emancipation Proclamation, but then we had all of this force pushing us down. And I think what's happening now is the volcano is now erupting. And now is the time to, you know, live. Don't be afraid to live into your Blackness. That's something I've had to learn. It's just don't be afraid. It's no longer, it's our time now to make Blackness not be a demerit, to make it our thing, and to make it what you want to be. And I think we can really do that now.
I agree. And I think if we can continue to instill this, again, that's probably why I got so excited to see the children out there. You know, I've seen these clips on TV of the little Black girl raising her little fist, you know, and just having some understanding of who she is. And, you know, we talked about images of beauty in our culture, you know, hair, all skin color, skin tone, all of these things, voice, lips. But my goodness, if we can instill these things in our children from a very early age, and they can grow up into that unapologetically, right? It'll be a good thing because, you know, and I've lived long enough and I've pastored long enough that I know that for most of us, regardless of race or color or anything, life will challenge all of us in some way. Yes, certainly some of us have different challenges, but living in skin on the earth will bring a certain amount of stuff. That's just the way it is, you know, and I've not met very many people who've gotten out of this life without some challenge. Again, I go back to my faith, you know, what I believe about myself, my place in the world, what I believe about God, what I believe about other people and their place. Right? So I'm hopeful, to be honest. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because of us as a church, as a staff. I'm hopeful about these conversations. We can do this. I believe it. I believe we, you know, good Lord, you know, in 3 weeks, we've seen all of this change, this recognition, Juneteenth. You know, gosh, people all over the country were having Friday off, right? You know, it's almost like it's a new phenomenon. It's not. No. And my prayer is that we don't stop. We don't stop. Don't let it die down, right? And it's all of us. It's incumbent upon all of us to not let this thing die down. You know, it's our time. It's our time. And we can do it. We can do it. Is it going to be easy? No, but, you know, watching George Floyd die was not easy. Right? Listening to the stories of my sons and their experiences is not easy. None of the things that we experience is easy. And this is not the only issue. There are lots of issues that need to be addressed. And I think King was right. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so we need to be looking at those places where there are injustice. And for me, it's not about, you know, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't do it, all of those things, but like, how can we live into a better narrative for the world and those who will come after? You know, I looked at my little grandson, 7 months old, and I really want a better world for him. I don't want him at 20 thinking he's going to disproportionately have a run-in with a police officer. Right? That his life is going to be threatened just because the color of his skin. I don't want that. And so that's, if I can help to make it better for him and for children like him and those who will come after, I'm going to do that. That's what I want to do.
Well, and I think we can all do that, especially as the church. You know, it is our job to get out there and fight and be Christians and lead the way in this. We can, I think you said this a while back, but we can really be out there leading the force, but we have to do the work.
And there are many ways to lead it, right? Some people will march, but I think we shouldn't underestimate the stuff we do every day. The people we see at work when we go back to work, right? You know, when decisions are made, how we vote, whether we vote, right? What are the issues? How can we change policy? Right? How can we listen differently? Mm-hmm. How can we take a stand when we know something is not right? When someone is being treated unfairly? How do we speak up? It's not okay to sit there and let it happen and then text somebody later, right? No. The moment calls for courage, and we must have it. And so there are many ways. And it's not just Black and brown people, it's the immigrant person also, right? It's the person who's hungry, it's the person who sleeps on the street, you know, it's the person walking around with mental illness. There's so many issues that we can be dealing with. And you might feel like, well, I can't take on them all, right? But I can be thoughtful about the ones that come my way every day. And they do come. And some days we may not feel like we have the capacity, but at the very least, we ought to begin to be more conscious, more aware, more willing.
Well, I think COVID has definitely allowed us to do that. It's stopped our loops, our kind of day-to-day grind, and everybody's been able to go, oh, this is what's happening in the world. And yes, like you said earlier, I hope that it doesn't die, and I hope that we can continue this fight. I want to thank you for being open and being willing to talk and let it out, and hopefully we can have more of these conversations. Now, this is the last episode of Coffee with Cathy for this season. We'll come back in the fall.
And you've agreed to be my co-host.
Yes, I'll be there.
Everybody's listening.
I will be there.
Thank you, Derrick. Thank you for all you do, and for all you do for us at the church, and for journeying with us here at Park Avenue. You know, we launch out on these experiences and we don't know, right? We sign on and we don't know. But for me, it's the everyday journey, right? It's not just Sunday morning. It's not just over here, even with social justice, right? It's not like this thing over there. It's every day trying. And some days we may fail, but we try again and keep trying. So God bless you and thank you. We did it.
Yes, we did it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coffee with Cathy. This podcast is brought to you by Park Avenue United Methodist Church. Follow us on social media at PAUMC NYC. You can also support our ministries by donating at paumcnyc.org/give. We hope you've enjoyed this Coffee with Cathy. Until next time.